Washington football. Woo! Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burgundy Zone. I am your host, Kyle. I will not be joined by my co-host for this little exclusive interview with our friend of the show, Mr. Trevor Sikkema of PFF Now. Thank you so much for joining me, brother, on this Wednesday. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited. It's a very exciting time of year where we got free agency moving all over the place. We got draft needs solidifying. So it's a fun time of year to talk some football. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. And look, Washington, like you being a Buccaneers fan, week one was hard for us, obviously. That playoff game did not miss anything, man. That was a fantastic showing from both teams. I thought Tampa Bay did a great job in free agency of just retaining their own. But with Washington, there's like mixed reviews of how Adam Peters and company have really orchestrated themselves throughout this process. What do you because let's separate them. The trades, the three trades. They got Tunzel, of course. They went out and got
Mhm.
Debo, of course. Rank those for me. What did you think of those?
I love both of those. I mean, if we're talking about the deals that they have done when it comes to the trade market, going out on the pro market and finding some guys to get on the roster via trade, not necessarily free agency. I mean, I love those two moves. Look, Tunsil gets traded from the Texans. A lot of people are confused on that. The Texans offensive line wasn't good anyways, and you're going to get rid of the one guy who was an elite pass blocker for you, who's been an elite pass blocker basically for every year of his career. It's a little strange. And then, okay, we hear some reports afterwards like, oh, well, it's because there wasn't the right attitude in the locker room. He wasn't good enough of a leader. I can't speak to any of that. All I know is he was by far their best offensive lineman. Offensive line is one of the areas that the Commanders were looking to hit pretty hard this offseason, specifically that offensive tackle spot. And there's no way they were going to do better than Laramie Tunsil. Like, even if you nail one of these guys in the draft who I think could have been good for you long term, they weren't going to be better for you in the immediate winning window than Laramie Tunsil is for you. So even though they gave up a lot to get him, it's totally worth it anytime that you have that offensive tackle need to get a guy that's a proven top 10 tackle in the league. So I like that move a lot. I like the Deebo Samuel move a lot too, especially getting him for a fifth round pick. I understand you're taking on a decent chunk of change of his contract, but it just felt like the vibes in San Francisco were getting weird. Like, it's just, Brandon Ayuk sort of asking in and out, and then he gets signed, and then he's asking for a trade, and Debo's kind of on the trade block. And we've seen through free agency how many guys that they turned over from that roster. It just felt like it was a little weird in San Francisco. So this is one of those instances where I think it was kind of a good trade for both sides. It was good for Debo to get a change of scenery, and I like him going into Cliff Kingsbury's offense. I think he's going to be perfect for what they want to do, especially from with their horizontal game, stretching the field from sideline to sideline as much as they want to push it deep down the field. So those two moves, in terms of, I can understand maybe a couple of the other moves that they made, one in particular with free agency that you're a little bit mixed on, but those two trades I feel like were great moves for them.
Absolutely. And the one, even going back to San Francisco, going back to that Christian McCaffrey trade that San Francisco got him for, they got him on his existing contract. And it wasn't until he played a season with them that they extended him. And Adam Peters has brought that philosophy here. As much as we have traded for Laramie and Debo, they still are on prove it deals, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And so I think that it's really smart the way that Adam Peters is doing this, because if you do acquire somebody from the outside, they still have to earn something. It's not like they're just getting handed, right? But the big free agency move that I think probably has the biggest mixed messages is the Javon Kinlaw signing. Can you kind of speak on how Dan Quinn and company and Joe Witt would be able to deploy Kinlaw? Did you like that signing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind him getting to work with Dan Quinn. I didn't love the signing because I thought they spent a lot of money on him. I mean, he was not good with the Jets, and for him to get $45 million over 3 years, I mean, that's quite frankly a really good contract for Javon Kinlaw, and he wasn't worth that number, in the later years when he was with the San Francisco 49ers and when he was with the New York Jets. Now, Adam Peters, there's that connection there. He's part of the unit that drafts him over in San Francisco. So obviously spending a first round pick on him, they believe in him and the overall talent level. So perhaps they just say like, hey, the first couple of stops didn't really pan out the way that we thought to. I mean, Kinlaw, there's a reason why he was a first round pick. He's a big dude. He's super athletic. He's really strong. He just hasn't been able to be efficient with all that talent that he has had. So for a guy like Dan Quinn, I think that he is the right guy, I suppose, to like pair him with and bet on. But it's hard to look at how inefficient Kinlaw was, especially against the run in particular over the last couple of years, and say, yeah, we're going to give that guy 3 years, $45 million. So that one was a big time stretch for me. But I suppose it's not that it can't work out for them. I think it's just hard to, over the last couple of years, look at how much of a letdown he felt with the Jets, and think that it's just going to magically be better with the Commanders.
Yeah, because I was telling the guys in the Discord, Trevor, that was confusing to me just because we just unloaded John Allen's contract, obviously, and then you
Right.
bring in another defensive tackle and a massive one. But Air Raid Concepts on Twitter brought up a really good point about the elephant end position going back to Seattle with Dan Quinn,
Sure.
where with Red Bryant, where you'd have that guy on the outside, right, that big D end, and that way it can kind of funnel and easier for you to set the edges. That makes a heck of a lot of sense to me because, like, looking at the draft, you don't really have that size in the draft or in free agency, and maybe that's what they really wanted to pay top dollar for, so to speak.
Hmm.
So that's how I'm kind of rationalizing it in my head. But look, at this point, I think that they've done enough in moves all from the past 2 seasons that I think we can trust them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, no. And it's a good point. Obviously, like having so that elephant defensive end position is somebody who has both size and length for you. And so when you look at Kinlaw, he's 6'5", around 315, 320 pounds. He fits that to a T. Again, I just wish he was a better run defender. Like over
Yeah.
the last couple of years, he's just not that, because that elephant end. I believe that's also
Fair.
sort of like in the Georgia and the Saban system as well. Like it's that supersized defensive end type of a player who can be, an odd or an even front type of a guy for you, but he could play that like 4-eye technique where you're still taking up a couple of gaps, even though you're technically listed as a defensive end. So again, I can see it there. And if they believe that they can get a better run defender out of Javon Kinlaw, I understand the scheme fit. Again, I still don't really understand the dollar amount
Yeah.
value that they would be putting in that position, but we'll see how they deploy him and see how valuable he is, because perhaps it's a situation where they feel like his presence can free up a lot of the other guys that are on the defensive line or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see how they try to maximize that contract they gave him.
Absolutely. The next guy I wanted to ask you about was Will Harris, the safety from the Saints. I've been able to see some of the highlights, and the guy is a thumper. He comes up, makes some plays. What can you tell us about Will Harris and what Washington should be expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good fit, right? I mean, like that's the area where they really wanted to sort of upgrade. I mean, you've got, Quan Martin, who is a guy who could play free safety for you. He could play in the slot. You have Mike Samerstill, who could also play in the slot, and this kind of gives you some flexibility there of where you want to play those two dudes. I would assume that Martin's the one who's playing more of that single high free safety coverage role, and you allow a guy like Harris to be able to sort of troll over the middle of the field and just sort of be a little bit of an enforcer. You can't be as much of an enforcer these days as the game of football used to be, but that's going to be his fit. And I like the signing from that regard. It felt like they were missing that type of physical presence from their safety room and that strong safety position. So I do like it for them.
Absolutely. Music to my ears, sir. But let's get into the fun part and being the draft class that we both obviously love to be able to look at film and look at guys. But who, like with Washington at 29, do you think that there are going to be possible teams that want to get back up into the first round? Washington's walking in with only 5 picks in the overall draft, 2 in the top 80 at the moment. And so everyone and their mother wants to trade back. Do you think there are some teams that are going to be wanting to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's always teams, especially depending on what the view of this quarterback class is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where Shadur Sanders is going to go in this upcoming draft, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to go in the top 10 or even the top 20. I think he could get into the 20s, and I think you could look at some of the teams that maybe didn't take a quarterback, didn't take a Cam Ward, didn't get a veteran quarterback who might want to pop up and get a Jackson Dart, a Shadur Sanders, a Jalen Milrow. I don't know what the league thinks of these players. I feel like it's just all over the place, the reports that you hear, because you never know. Hey, is big media and agents trying to prop up this
Right.
quarterback class, or does the NFL actually like him? It feels like a little bit of a 2002 story where Kenny Pickett went 19th overall, and then we didn't see Desmond Ritter as the next quarterback off the board
Right.
until the third round. So I wonder if we're kind of headed into that. But anytime there's quarterback intrigue, Yeah, I think that they're going to look to trade back, especially because they don't have that third round pick. So being able to move back, I think, would be advantageous for them because I believe that the second and the third round is what holds a lot of the value in this draft class, anyways. I don't know if we're going to look back on this draft and say, boy, what a star studded draft. What a, perennial all pro players, Hall of Fame play. I don't know if we're going to look at this draft and say that, but I think we are going to look back at it 4 or 5 years from now. And it's those teams that really either nailed their day two picks or had the most day two picks that you go, man, they were really able to get some good contributing players, some good complementary players to their stars, whatever that looks like. And so I think that Washington understands that. Peters understands that. And he'd like to get maybe an extra second round or third round pick in there if he could trade back.
Absolutely. And let's just say that hypothetically speaking, Washington is not able to trade back out of 29. Obviously, the Laramie Tunsil trade changes things a little bit. The necessity of being able to get a tackle at 29 is not on the really at the board anymore. You can go in other avenues. So I want to talk to you about who do you think a position that has the most pop for Washington in terms of production that they could get at 29?
I still think it's edge rusher. I really do, because it feels as though, even though I like a lot of edge rushers in this class, it does feel like teams are more hot and cold on the edge rushers.
Okay.
Just that, for when I say hot and cold, I mean like some team might love James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Some teams might not want to draft him at all, and it's going to be a little bit of a beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but. Yeah, when I think about the edge rush group and I think about where Washington's picking at the end of the first round, that's where I think the sweet spot is. I mean, whether it's Nick Scordon, maybe Michael Williams, Mike Green, James Pierce Jr., you get even further down. I mean, maybe even a guy like Braden Swinson from LSU, Prince Umanmielen, maybe a Landon Jackson. There's just a lot of names that you can rattle off that are possibilities for them at number 25, 29, or even in a small trade back, sort of like we were talking about there. So to me, I still think that edge rusher is the position that they're going to primarily target with their first selection, wherever that ends up being.
My man. And one player that I want to be able to get more film on, and I've heard that there's rumblings around. What's the latest? And could you give us any insight into Mike Green from Marshall? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so I mean, Mike has there were some off the field allegations against him, some sexual assault allegations when it came to something that happened with him in high school, something that happened with him when he was at Virginia, and he was asked these questions when he was at the combine. And look, I don't know what's true and what's not, but he said, he's like, look, I was never investigated for any of these things. He's like, so there was never any sort of investigation for it. And so again, I don't know what's going on. I don't know the full scope of that situation. Obviously, each NFL team has to do their own due diligence. They've got to figure that out for themselves. But that, in my opinion, is the only reason why he would be available at 29. He's too damn good of a pass rusher to be available at the late part of the first round. I have him as a top 15 overall player when it comes to film. I just think that he's a little undersized. He's got a little bit shorter of arms, but his speed to power conversion is great. He's got some pretty good flexibility to him. He's a great speed rusher. He's got good work with his hands. He's establishing some good pass rush moves already. And then he was a little bit quiet to start against Ohio State, which was one of his biggest competition games where I should say Marshall didn't play the best of the best all the time, right? And so those games where they actually played against top tier competition, you want to weigh those very heavily. So in one of those games, that was Ohio State, it took him a little bit of time to warm up, but man, it felt like in the second, third, fourth quarter, he realized, oh, I can hang with these dudes, and I'm even better than some of these dudes. And he was able to really let it rip. And at the Senior Bowl, the first 2 days of Senior Bowl practice, when he was out there, he was really putting on a show. So this is a player who is in my opinion, top 20, top 15 caliber type of pass rusher and edge rusher. But there's a chance that he gets to 29 just because of the uncertainty of people kind of looking into, okay, what really happened off the field with him 3-4 years ago.
My man, dude, I absolutely loved hearing all of that because the Ohio State one, I had to watch the whole game. It wasn't like it would allow me just to see the defense. And so every time they gave up a big run to Ohio State, I was like, now I have to fast forward another 5 minutes. I have to wait more. And that defense just got bludgeoned, obviously, by the national champions. But another edge guy that I really like, I love the speed, the conversion ratio that he has, and Donovan Ezeiru from Boston College. And I think that I almost get the feeling of the Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah type of guy with him, where he's like the smaller guy, but obviously very fast and physical. What did you think of Donovan's film?
Yeah, so I can see where the mind would make that connection with a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Although I will say Owusu-Koramoah more of the off-ball
Yeah,
linebacker type than the on-ball linebacker
right.
type that Ezeiru is. I think that he should absolutely be a first-round pick, and I should have mentioned him as one of the names there because I have him number 16 overall on my big board right now. I
Wow.
think he is a fantastic football player. I just don't know. I'm running out of things to say about this guy to come up with reasons why he wouldn't be a top 20 pick. He's a little bit smaller, and so you do have to sort of take that into account. I think he'll be a little bit more of a stand-up outside linebacker type, but he can play with his hand in the dirt a little bit as well. And I think that Dan Quinn could certainly get the most out of him. But 6'2", so he's a little bit smaller in height, but he's got decently long arms to him. He measured into the combine at 247. He said that he played at 247. He said he'd probably be comfortable bulking up to about 255 and still playing pretty well, but extremely productive football player over the last 3 years in particular. 44 tackles for loss, 30 sacks, 8 forced fumbles, a bunch of passes broken up as well. And what I love the most about him is I love this podium session at the combine, talking about the why of what works in pass rushing. And somebody asked him, hey, I've noticed in your film that you use a ghost move, and he's like, can you talk to me about what goes into you using that ghost move? And Ezeiru is basically like, well, hold on here. We can't just talk about the ghost move. We have to talk about what sets up the ghost move because, you got to be able to, you got to be able to win with power initially. You got to strike some fear into them. You got to be able to get them on their heels. And so then all of a sudden, when they're a little bit on their heels and they're bracing for power, that's when you flash that ghost move to them. They'll brace for it because they've felt that power from you before. And that's when you can really get up and under their shoulders and get by and really be able to turn the corner around the outside shoulder. So it's like him. There's
Mm.
so many pass rushers that go into the NFL and just don't understand the why yet. And I understand that. Like to be honest, a lot of coaches at the college football level at this point, they're recruiters.
Yeah.
Some are great, some are both, but a lot of these guys are just recruiters. They're not necessarily savants or real teachers at a specific position. And so a lot of these guys, you just get some of these athletic freaks coming out of high school and you go, all right, well, we're going to put you on the defensive line. Just go, like we'll watch some clinics. We'll teach you a couple of pass rush moves, but that's it. That's not Donovan Ezeiru. He is a true student of the game. He understands how you win at the position with your mind as much as your physical abilities and your talent. So I think he should go a lot higher than 29, but if he makes it to 29, he'd be a great pick for him.
The more I hear about him, the more I like about him. And as much as that his film was impressive, obviously that answer is of itself because the chess match at the next level is what really separates guys, and obviously he fits that bill. Now you said like edge rusher at 29, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. That's been one of my needs going back to last offseason. But let's say that second round, sitting in that area, Washington right now only has 2 cornerbacks on the roster. But also, you're kind of looking at wide receiver as well. Obviously, we traded for Debo, but Terry, you got Luke McCaffrey, not that many. So cornerback and wide receiver are both one of those that are slim. In that area of the second round, in the back end, where's the talent in those 2 positions?
Yeah, I would say it's probably wide receiver, especially because, if you were talking about an earlier second round pick, it's a little bit of a different conversation.
Right,
Washington not picking until 61
right.
is kind of tough, right? Because I think that Trey Amos, the cornerback from Ole Miss, who I think is pretty scheme versatile, he'd be great for him. Does he make it to 61? I'm not sure. I think that he's probably got the best chance as I'm sort of going through the PFF big board right now. I think he's probably the guy who has the best chance. I don't think Savone Revel from East Carolina is going to make it to 61. With Maxwell Harrison running a 4.28, I don't think he's making it to 61 either. I don't think Azareye'h Thomas is going to make it there. Maybe a Benjamin Morrison. I think that could be a sneaky pick for them at 61, the cornerback from Notre Dame. This is somebody who played really well as a freshman and a sophomore, played a little bit this season, but had a hip injury. He missed most of the year, including that national championship run. But my people at Notre Dame telling me that, like, hey, no, the hip should be all right. He should be fine. He could have gone up for the national championship game, but it would have been one of those instances where he probably would have been about 70% still, and he didn't want to lace him up and be only 70% and then be a reason why they ended up losing, so he doesn't play in that game. Azareye'h Thomas, I wonder if he's going to be off the board at that time, like I mentioned. Darian Porter from Iowa State, somebody who's very intriguing. He's got that 6'2", 109 95 name, but he's also a track superstar. You saw some
Mm.
incredible numbers from him in the broad and the 40-yard dash. Ran a 4.30 40-yard dash at over 6'2" and over 195 pounds. So I think the athleticism there is pretty special. If you wanted to go corner, I think that's probably the route. And then at 61 for wide receiver, it just kind of depends, right? Because they've got Terry McLaurin, they have Debo Samuel. They would probably want more of like an X. And if you can get if you can get Trey Harris from Ole Miss, if you can get an Elikayo Maynor from Stanford, I think that those guys would make a lot of sense
Okay.
for you. But in this wide receiver class, there's just not a lot of true X receivers. So I think that's what it would come down to for me is one of those guys at the receiver spot available? If not, I'm probably staying away and I'm probably drafting one of those corners that I rattled off.
Do you think Jaden Higgins from Iowa State is going to transition well to the NFL?
Yeah, I do. I like Jaden Higgins a lot, and that's a really good call out. I should have named him, but it just feels as though he's getting like late first, early second round consideration.
Okay.
Him making it to 61 again. There's no guarantee that that would happen, but I actually think he would be perfect on this team. I think he would be excellent if they can snatch him up. I just don't know how likely that is after a phenomenal combine performance from him.
And one of the guys I highlighted, we do a draft show with Red Zone in the lab, and we did linebackers. And one of the guys that I highlighted was Jay Higgins from Iowa. I'm not sure if you're able to watch him at all, but he is a thumper. And if you're looking for somebody that I know, obviously Washington doesn't have a pick in that sort of area for Jay Higgins, but I would imagine that that would be a pretty good person to slide in behind our boy. Oh my God, why am I forgetting his name? No, we just re-signed him, Trevor. My goodness.
Oh, Bobby Wagner.
Oh, what's going on with me today? I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. No, Bobby White. Look, when you try to also now learn draft names, there's only so much the brain can try to remember when it comes to NFL names. No,
I got a limited supply up here.
there you go. Me too. My fiance would tell you that as well. That I have a limited supply up there. So yeah, it's Bobby Wagner is a good linebacker to obviously bring back. I like that move from them. Having Frankie Louvu is really important for them as well. I like Jade Higgins, and honestly, like you'd probably be able to get Jay Higgins somewhere on day 3 with like one of their day 3 picks, just because look, ton of tackles from him over his college career at Iowa. I believe he was a team captain. He's the Mike linebacker. He's making the calls. He's the heart and soul of the defense. He's just not a great athlete, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's tough to play the linebacker position when you really can't run and chase. So
Right.
a depth linebacker, a special teams linebacker, somebody that obviously has a ton of experience playing in a great conference like the Big Ten. I would like Jay Higgins on this team, but I don't think it's anything that you got to take on day 2. I think you could certainly wait and be able to use some sort of day 3 selection on him. I think you get him.
Okay. And then let's just say Washington doesn't trade back and they're able to recoup some capital in the middle of the draft. They
Mm-hmm.
right now, I believe they have 3 in the back end in the 7th round, 6th round. What are some
Mm-hmm.
positions and players that you really like in that area? And obviously things can change, obviously with pro days, interviews, everything like that. But what are some names in that back end do you think would be really good players in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're talking about 6th and 7th round picks, you're talking about guys who are sort of flyer players anyways, but there are some guys who I'm going down to the 200s here on my big board. Kane Madrano is somebody who I'm super intrigued
Mm,
by. Talk about a linebacker from UCLA. He's a converted safety, so he's a little bit lighter, but the dude can fly, right? And we know that Dan Quinn's not afraid to utilize those safety and linebacker hybrid type of a player. So I like him. Montrell Johnson showed a lot more juice at the combine from the running back position than he ever showed when he was at Florida. And I'm a Gator. I watched basically every carry that he had. He was a guy who could run behind his pads and run real tough, but now we saw at the combine, he's got some extra juice to him, and he's an NFL athlete as well. So I definitely like that. I don't, I'm trying to think of like these players are necessarily going to get there. Malachi Moore from Alabama, I wonder if he's going to be that late, like 6th, 7th round pick. He was great. He was starting for Alabama as a true freshman. That he lost his job to Brian Branch when he came back. I don't know if he's a great athlete, but
okay.
Nick Saban loved him. He approached the game so well. He's somebody who is exactly where he needs to be. He's a good communicator on the back end. He is somebody that I think could make a lot of sense. I wonder where a guy, here's another dude I'll shout out. Holland Pierce, the offensive tackle from Rutgers.
Yep.
This is the big mountain of a man, right? And so I don't know how high he goes in the draft because you'd look at his measurables and shoot,
Incredible.
let me see what they have. 6'8", 345. He's just like a hulking human. I stood next to him at the Shrine Bowl, and it is hilarious just the fact that we're both human beings and we're built so differently. And I think that he could be a guy that you just take a chance on the size, maybe in the 6th and the 7th round. I mean, he had pretty good film, but he doesn't really move the way that you would want an NFLer to move. But yeah, the NFL will take a chance on guys with those kinds of size. So just scrolling the big board there, some guys in the 200s. Those are the guys that really pop out to me for the names.
Definitely very clunky. I remember his arm length, like 2 inches longer than like everybody else in that.
Insane.
Insane. Obviously, he has those sort of put together the measurables that you could work with, so to speak, if you truly needed
Totally.
to. Trevor, only a couple more questions for you that I have. What is the latest with Washington? Do you think Washington is done with trades, or what are some names in free agency that you think Washington could bring in here just to add? And because it's not going to be the crazy good, like crazy signing nationally, but somebody that could come in and help Washington.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I'm trying to scroll to see because we got a great tracker over at PFF.com. You guys can see all the guys who are signed, all the guys who are still available. Like I look at some of these edge rushers and I wonder, what's going to be the price tag? Obviously, Dante Fowler Jr. is still out there, so they could re-sign him if they want, but there's some other veterans like Von Miller is on the table. Zadarius Smith is out there. So Matthew Judon. So like there's some players that are like that, but then I'm just scrolling the list here, like Carl Lawson, Josh Uche, Azeez Ojulari. Like there's a handful of rushers and defensive linemen who I think could make sense for this team. And at this point in time of free agency, you're probably getting it for a bargain. And so I actually do like those edge rushers as potential guys who could kind of come in and make a difference for this team. But I would look at edge because I'd like for edge to be a little bit stronger, even though I'm very comfortable drafting one at the back end of the first round. Those are a handful of players in free agency that I'd target if I was them to get a little bit better edge rusher.
Yeah, I'm sorry for doing this little tennis match for you, but let's go back to the draft real quick for my second question.
That's fine.
Am I crazy for being more excited for Andrew Makuba over Nick Emanwari?
Ooh, dude. I like Makuba. Give me the dudes who play with their hair on fire,
Yeah.
man. I love what he was like when he was a true freshman at Clemson. Sort of went through the injury, and then they had a scheme change that just was not really beneficial to what he did. Gets over to Texas, and they let him just fly around, especially with Jahdae Barron moving from the slot safety position more to the outside. Then it was Andrew Makuba who could play next to Michael Taff, and I just thought that Makuba was so impactful this past year. So he's a little bit smaller, but very clearly the Commanders and Dan Quinn, they don't care if you're a little bit smaller as long as you're a damn good football player, and I think that he is. So I don't know if I'll have him ranked above Nick Emanwari, but I am a little bit more skeptical on Emanwari. Some people saw the combine results and they were like, oh, top 15 pick, lock all day long, no question about it. And it's like, well, a lot of his ball production was sort of right place, right time. It wasn't exactly him making those plays in the football. Sometimes when he's got to turn and chase, sometimes when he's got to play man coverage, the hips are a little bit slower to flip. And so there's things to think about with Emanwari. It's not just about, big safety. No, we're drafting this guy where we drafted Kyle Hamilton. I don't think he's that sort of player, but I don't know if I'm going to have him above Emanwari, but man, Makuba is so much fun after a really damn good year. So he's a great football player. That's a great shout out too.
I absolutely loved his film, of course. Trevor, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking with me again. And it's very hard to be able to get you on here because now you're on NFL Network and everything with PFF. But real quick, what happened with the ex-PFF guy, with the offensive coordinator with the Texans? What do you think happened there? Because he was talked about as being a possible head coach, and then now nothing.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with him. I mean, I've really loved what Slowick was able to do for his couple of years when he was with the Houston Texans, and obviously he's not there anymore as the offensive coordinator. It is. I'm not sure. I think he'll bounce back. No, I think that he'll be able. I actually didn't see if he landed somewhere, if he got a play calling gig or what. But he's somebody who, he's a smart dude, so he will land on his feet. It felt as though the head coach stuff is always, I feel like, a little premature. Like if you have a couple of good games as a play caller, it's like, oh, this guy's the next great head coach. So right. I felt like it was a little bit early anyways, but it's all great experience from him. And I know that he's going to hit the ground running wherever he is next.
Yeah, he was one of my favorites to be able to be brought here for Washington. But obviously we got Dan Quinn, and I'm not going to sour grapes about it. I just thought it was that was knee jerk. It almost seemed like to an extent. Trevor, before you get out of here, just like to put in your social media handle and your show, just in case anyone watching wants to come follow you, brother.
Yeah, man, at Tampa Bay Trey that we have on Twitter and on Instagram for myself, and all the draft stuff I got over at PFF.com, and then also the NFL Stock Exchange podcast on YouTube.
My man, Trevor, enjoy your week, brother, and enjoy this draft process. It's going to be a fun one.
Appreciate it, dude. Anytime, you too.
Thank you, man. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time. What's up, everyone? This is Kyle from the Burgundy Zone. We are releasing our own merch to support the show. If you want to rock the Burgundy Zone logo or you want to see Reed's face on your shirt, we got it. We're starting with t-shirts, hoodies, and zip-up. So if you're a fan of the show, make sure you snag one before they are gone. Check out the link in our bio on Instagram, or you can find the link in the description of the video. Thanks again for all your support. Until next time.